Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for jumping into our webinar. We appreciate your time today. We have a great webinar topic coming up for folks that are experts or folks that are coming in for the first time, or maybe someone that just thinks they can get a little bit more value. We're going to be able to cover all of those topics today. We also wanted to give a special shout out to our Pandemonium User Conference coming up in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's going to be on March 20th and 21st. And we have a lot of great speakers lined up. It's going to be a great way for you all to hear what other folks that are Pendo users are doing inside of our product, and maybe get some creative ideas for the guides and type of analysis that you can accomplish with Pendo. With me today, this is Brian Roach. I'm our Midwest and Pacific Northwest Customer Success Manager. I also have Ryan Warner, who'll be covering the second half of the webinar today. He's our enterprise level customer success manager. And for folks that are maybe not Pendo customers yet or still trialing, we just want to let you all know that Pendo is a tool that's going to help you analyze your product better, make better product decisions, and be able to gather feedback and reach out to your visitors whenever you have some type of message that you would like to push out for your product quickly. So you may be attending this webinar for a couple different reasons. You may not be getting value full value out of Pendo's feature capability yet. You may want a refresher on best practices. Maybe you've had an executive directive come down and your goals that you had from when you originally installed Pendo have changed. You'd like to realign those. That's fantastic. The great thing about Pendo is that you can re-tag anything inside of our product at any time. There's always room for improvement. There's always room to make Pendo more reflective of what your internal goals are and the type of things that you'd like to accomplish. I'm a big college basketball fan myself, and growing up, I'd always hear about the greats that John Wooden coached. This guy won 10 NCAA men's Division I basketball championships in a 12-year period. No one will ever accomplish that. So Larry Bird, Lou Alcindor, who became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all came up through his program. And on the first day of practice, no matter how highly recruited any of the freshmen were, he always said, we're going to begin by learning to tie our shoes. So it's great thinking about all these 7-foot fantastic NBA players as 18-year-olds coming to college, learn how to tie their shoes. I think the same is true for Pendo. There's so much that you can do with inside of our platform that we want to make sure that you understand fundamentally how to set things up, and internally what our best practices are. We'd like to pass those along to you so that you can go back and reflect and say, are we tagging things in the appropriate way? Are we naming things right? Is how Pendo is established really truly reflecting what our intention is in the ways that we'd like to make our product better? So what we're going to do, I'm going to cover the next section, topic area 1, which is going to be identifying our sticky features. And let's say, what is a sticky feature? We'll go back to the basics there. We're then going to move into section 2, which is looking at who is using our features and how they're being used. That is going to allow us to kind of bring in what your objectives are in the product and be able to make Pendo a little bit more valuable for you. And then in the third section, we're going to talk about whether features are born naturally sticky, or are you able to influence and build stickiness through education and outreach and the other types of things that Pendo can allow you to do. So starting off with sticky feature identification. What is a sticky feature? Sticky features are elements, and you can define that as a button, a link, a dropdown, any clickable aspect of your site that is not a URL. That's the main difference there. And those sticky features and elements have the purpose of getting a user to return to that particular website or to hold their attention. What we're trying to do here is to get them to come back, visit more frequently, spend more time on site, get more engagement. Ultimately, our goal is to have help influence users to see value in your product or service. I also like to reflect back on the stages of Pendo journey. If you're not getting 100% of the value out of Pendo on day 1, that's fine. A lot of folks come to us and they install Pendo because it'll help them identify and learn what they already don't know about their product. So what we really just need to focus on, going back to the basics and making sure you're getting value out of these sticky features, is saying that we have our snippet installed on every page and that our visitor IDs and our account IDs are labeled with a unique identifier. We then can go through and we'll be able to tag things. From a broad perspective, we can wildcard and group things together, and as we proceed, we'll be able to narrow things down more and more as you get more value out of the product. We'll then be able to determine what is getting value and how that aligns with your internal objectives. Maybe you've spent a lot of development and engineering dollars to build new aspects of your site. Maybe you're changing to a second new UI and you slowly want to start letting folks know, hey, get rid of your bookmarks here. Let's publish a guide to those and say, this is the new feature set you should be using. Let's give them an ROI related to that. Folks that use this new feature get 10% better engagement, or people that fit your customer profile have told us via surveys that this has been an improvement in their experience for us. Those are all things we're going to talk about in the latter half of our presentation today. The goal here is that you're going to start learning about your product. You're going to be able to filter and look at your users a little bit more narrowly as time goes on, and you're going to be able to update your objectives. It's not going to be a static thing where you install Pendo on day one and you let it run its course. It's going to be something you're going to engage with. It's going to help you solve some questions you have and potentially answer some theories or hypotheses and let you know if the data is really backing up those theories and hypotheses you have. Quickly, I just want to let folks know that we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the presentation today. So feel free to kind of write things down as we get going, but we'll leave a few minutes at the end of the presentation to answer some of the questions that we don't get to. So I'm sure we'll cover a lot of the questions that might be coming through right now, but just a heads up about that, we're going to be moving through that way. Again, this slide is kind of illustrating how we look at Pendo internally. If you're familiar with our UI, we have an analytics environment that you are dropped into when you log in. It has a dashboard, your pages tab, features tab, visitors accounts, guides, NPS. All of those are the analytics of how folks are using your site and the type of outreach, the effect that the outreach that you have is having with your customer. So what we're going to see here on the analytics side of things is how folks are using your site as a benchmark in the current moment. It's going to then be able to say, we will then be able to say, what are our objective goals? What would we like to see? If this is our current benchmark time on site, if this is our current number of feature clicks, if this is our current visitor login frequency, what would we like it to be to show more value? And can we say from that the folks that do exhibit maybe longer time on site, more feature clicks, certain page visits, what are they getting value out of the application more that the other folks are not? And how can we kind of influence that there? So that's where we marry the Pendo analytics environment. It's going to say, this is how we're using the application. These are the things that we would like people to accomplish. And what we can then do is have an action, a driver, an outreach, an onboarding campaign, a poll or a survey to really help kind of move the needle in the direction that we want. Starting off, again, like I mentioned, the Pendo JavaScript snippet is the first step always. And so you can see that in the top right corner of this slide here. This is the actual snippet of Pendo code that we're installing in your application. So the two red boxes that we have called out there in the slide are the visitor ID, the unique identifier, and the account ID. What we want is those to never change through the life cycle of being a Pendo customer. The advantage of keeping the visitor ID and the account ID the same unique identifier through the time that you're using Pendo is that all of the metadata fields below those, email, role, you can see those examples, or on account ID, the name of the account ID, the plan level the account's on, maybe the revenue or the price, the creation date, renewal date, all of those details that we have in there. So long as the visitor ID and the account ID are static, you can retag all of the metadata fields, you can retag all of your pages, you can retag all of your features, and you're not going to lose historical data. You'll be able to track those back to the visitor ID and account ID from the date of the first Pendo snippet installation. So looking at this very broadly, what we're going to see in Pendo immediately when we install the JavaScript snippet on all of the URLs behind your login screen so that you can get all of your identified visitors showing up if you install Pendo in front of your login screen, that's fine. You may just get anonymous visitors coming through there. What we're going to see is that all of the pages are going to be immediately uploaded into Pendo. You can see the pages you have tagged and labeled and grouped and identified versus the ones that you have not. Features, on the other hand, are a little bit more objective, and what you'll be able to do is tag granularly or you'll be able to tag broadly. So oftentimes a good strategy and approach for folks that are early Pendo users is to say, well, if we don't know what features are getting the most clicks right now, let's look at the pages. At least we can tell how much time on site people are spending on a page. And that may be a good way for you to start saying, well, that is giving me some insight into what features on those pages that are present that we would want to tag. That's where the hypothesis and the theory and the gut reaction comes in. And that's going to show you, hey, this is where people actually are spending time. They are clicking these specific links, drop downs, buttons on those specific URLs because, again, like I said, Pendo is going to identify all of the URLs from the get-go. What our next step is to determine what are the highly used and valuable features. So once we start tagging those different features, all of the Pendo analytics environments have these great data visualization tables at the bottom that's going to allow you to add in columns, look at cross-referencing things like maybe what pages are on, what pages certain features are on, what kind of visitor details are happening in association with feature clicks and things like that. But we're also going to see some just basic high-level metrics. So you can see in the back screenshot that says features, it's kind of a white table, that there's 3 columns on the right: number of visitors, number of accounts, and number of clicks. So those are the types of additional data fields you can add in as columns. What we can see by those, just sorting top to bottom as we have in the far right, is the over the last 30-day time period. Again, that's the filter at the top. For the everyone segment, every single visitor that's coming into your site, internal, external, any visitor that we're identifying in Pendo, that's the overall number of clicks over the last 30-day period. So right off the bat, we know, well, that's the key indicator for the top feature click. Then you can ask yourself, is that really aligning internally with our goal of what we would like folks to do? Going back to the let's learn today and start with the fundamentals of tying our shoes, that's going to really help us and say, how are we tagging and naming these features? A common mistake, or maybe not a mistake, but an approach that may not be as valuable for folks, is that they come in and they tag all of the pages and all of the features in a way that mimics the site architecture. So let's say you have 5 admin pages, you have 3 data visualization tables, you have 4 form pages. They tag and represent their application in Pendo exactly as it exists in the real world. What may be more valuable here, and I just want everyone to think about this, is how could we tag those things, label them, group them, organize them for what's most important? You may not care about every single page. You may not care about the 3rd site settings page. Throw all those site settings pages together. One thing that you can do when you're tagging features and tagging pages is start grouping them, and maybe you group the 5 most important features, sticky features, with a label, and you can say, this is our sticky features group. Let's just look at those off the bat. Obviously, you can tag a lot of other things. You can kind of filter to get them off the page so you don't have to view them all the time. But it's really helpful to say, what are our internal objectives? Is it getting adoption from certain characteristics for a website? Well, let's tag, name, group, and organize our features to reflect what your goals are. We also want you to come in with what your theories are. And again, this is going to change from customer to customer, and every customer, we have a lot of different industries, we have a lot of different folks. We want you to come and say, this is why I think people are behaving the way that they are. Again, you may not know the first day that you install the Pendo JavaScript snippet on your application exactly those insights, because you may not be getting visitors logging in and engaging with those features on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So typically after we have a few weeks of Pendo being installed on your application, we see what the average weekly visitor looks like, what the average monthly visitor looks like, what the average daily visitor look like. And that's going to allow us to say, well, for the folks who are coming on a daily basis, obviously there's something bringing them back. There's something that's part of our website that might be making them just wanting to return to us. So what we can then do is say, let's look at the benchmark data. This is how it has been for the first couple of weeks of the Pendo snippet installation. And once we've done that, we can say, well, where would we like them to be, and how can we compare that to what the best parts of our application are? It'll give you the direction to say you can focus your efforts here. Obviously, there's types of outreach you can do. We'll talk about in the third half of our presentation, the third section of our presentation today, where you can say, we really want to publish guides here. We want onboarding related to this, but you also may be able to gain insights for your development and your engineering team to say, Pendo's going to help us patch these for now. We're going to be able to put guides up, tool tips, do some in-app customer education, but really we need to make a smoother experience. We need to make a more direct experience to help folks based on how folks are using the app well, and when we compare that to how folks are not using the app well. Lastly, we're going to start seeing a lot of marriage of insights in Pendo. It's not a platform that has a lot of disparate tools. A lot of what we do inside the application is very interconnected, and it is designed that way on purpose. For example, NPS is a really powerful tool. It's going to marry what our quantitative usage and analysis of the website is with the qualitative feedback of how our customers feel and what their sentiment is about our application. So NPS, for example, you're able to see on a scale of 1 to 10 how likely someone is to recommend your product or service to a friend or coworker. What we can then see is, based on their responses, what aspects of your application they're using, how much time on site they have for certain pages, how many feature clicks they have for certain features. And then you can see in the bottom left graphic here, we have this kind of dotted line with this cross, right? To the right of that vertical line are all of our promoters. These are the features that the folks that feel positive sentiment about our website are using. For features, for example, the longer that line is, the more feature clicks they have. You can analyze this via pages as well. It would be a time on site would be the increasing length of the line. To the left of that vertical middle dotted line are where our detractors are spending a lot of time on our site. So you can see there's obviously an outlier to the far left here. That would be a feature that I would definitely want to have a call out for. I would definitely want to be, tracking it in Pendo and making sure that this feature that's causing a lot of really poor experience and poor sentiment and poor feedback is something that we focus on. So again, there are a lot of aspects of Pendo's application that are married together, segments being one of those ones. We'll talk about those in a moment, but really we want to help you understand the insights that you can gain here. And the more of our platform that you use, the more that you'll be able to kind of get those comparisons down. On the right side of this slide, you can also see a new feature that we have. It's under the behavior dropdown on the left side of our analytics environment. It's called trends. And so what you can do with trends is compare aspects of the Pendo analytics environment. So that could be a segment to another segment, maybe a certain time period user group versus a past time period user group versus a current time period user group, or maybe a power user segment versus a uneducated user segment. Or you can look at feature comparisons or pages comparisons. So this is a great example for folks that are retiring a part of their UI, where maybe you have an old part of your UI, some feature sets that are not used very well, that are kind of convoluted and not very clear, and you're replacing them with hopefully a more sleek, kind of fluid environment. What we can then see is, truthfully, as they're both up in your site, over time, is the newer, sleeker, what we expect to be a better experience, is that giving more positive results? Are people actually engaging with those features more? Are they coming back more frequently? Are they actually clicking on and following through all of those feature sets? So those are the types of insights that we can gain. Right now, I'm going to pass it off to Ryan. And just again, a quick reminder, we have a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions about each section, definitely write them down, but we'd be happy to address them towards the end of the call today.
Thanks, Brian. And you can actually drop those at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a Q&A function down there. You're more than welcome to drop those in. And if we can answer them on the fly, we'll take care of that as well. And if not, we'll certainly get to them at the end. So Brian did a great job of going through, obviously, features and kind of the setup on that and why it matters on that side of things. But I think the next question that comes to mind, just naturally speaking, is, the who and the how. So who's using these features? How are they being used? We talk about, how much the user can really vary and how they're using the product can really change from user to user, depending on the role, depending on the industry, depending on the geography. So, it really helps to understand that and get a better feel for, who's utilizing these across the board. So as we dive in, I think a good place to start, and something that is really a base of our product and what makes us really successful at what we do is on the segmentation side. And when I'm talking about a segment, I'm talking about basically you're building out these custom cohorts of users based off of different data sets and different rules that you set up in these segments. And I'll go through a couple of examples in a second, but I wanted to lay out what really makes up a segment and then show you some great easy segments that you can obviously do on your own. But segments can be based off of page and feature usage. They can also be based off of poll results in the application, as well as any type of account metadata or summary data, as well as visitor metadata and summary data. So it really allows you to get granular with things and really dig down. You can create segments off of whether or not somebody's used a feature, whether or not they've been to a specific page, or how much time they spent in the application, or where they spent in the application. So it really kind of opens things up on that end and allows you to see, at a segment level, what are some of the stickier or maybe possibly the more value driving features inside the application. So as you look into this first example, these are two really easy ones that I think are really helpful to start off with. So you can see on the left-hand side, this is creating a segment for users that have never used a feature before. And I think that's valuable because obviously that's, in many of these features you have inside your application, you invested a lot of roadmap and a lot of development time to make that possible. And understanding who hasn't used some of these features in the application that could be some of your stickier features in the app. And trying to find ways through some learning resources, and we'll touch on that in a second, but trying to find ways to engage these users into those features to try and to get that stickiness, to try and engage that user into the application through those key sticky features in there. The segment on the right is looking at a segment of users who have used a feature at least 10 times in the application. So, more of your heavy users in the app, users that have gone back to it, they've seen the value in that feature and they've continued to utilize it again and again. I think it's interesting to look at, what the makeup is of these visitors inside your application. Is it, we get down to it from a granular level, is it a certain type of users, a certain type of industry that sees value in this feature? And if so, let's start driving users of that similar trait into this feature inside the application. The second segment setup is based off account type. So maybe you want to see what the enterprise segment of users are utilizing in the application. What are their key features they're using in the app? Where are the key pages they're going to inside of your product? Or looking at it based off of, in the right-hand side, we're doing it based off the ARR, but we're looking at our small to medium business customers and understanding, again, based off that segment, how are they using the application? Where are they going? Where are the key areas? Where are they spending the most time inside the application? This can be really valuable, obviously, across the board, not only from a analytics standpoint and understanding how they're using the application, how they're maybe using some of these stickier features in the app. But I think it's just interesting to note, especially depending on what your target market is as a product. You can see on both these examples, we're using plan level as well as ARR. These are obviously custom or agent metadata fields you can pass over at the visitor or the account level. The more you're able to pass over about your visitors or accounts, I think it really exponentially improves the ability to analyze some of the data you have. This is all, anything that lives within your product that's a variable you can pass over about the visitor or the account can really help to increase how you can analyze the data you have, the usage data you have about your visitors and your accounts. So if there are things that you'd like to know more about your product that you aren't passing over now, certainly either the CSM or anybody from our team is happy to kind of talk with you and discuss with your installation team on ways you can, and different additional fields you can pass over to help out, because I think that does really make a difference here. So when we look at paths, and to step back a little bit, paths are kind of a representation of how your users are moving through the application. And you can actually look at it in two different ways. You can look at it how users are moving away from a page or feature in the application. So, in this example here, once users hit the dashboard, where did they go after that point? What features did they click on? What pages did they visit? You can also look at the reverse side of that and say, well, I want to see how users ended up in the dashboard. And I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, why does this matter? But I think where this can really come into play, especially when talking about, identifying stickier features, once I've found a feature that, seems to really show value to the user and seems to really keep them within the application, I want to know how they got there. Because what that's going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to see, the direction and the path they took through your application, and see how many different ways users can get there. And also, when we get into guides, it shows you how you can start maybe directing users through the most convenient way to get to that feature in the application. So, I think it's important to understand how they got to that point or what led them to that area, to better understand what the user was experiencing as they got to that point. So I have a question here that I think is worth answering right now. So a question came up: instead of tracking pages of features, can I track button clicks? And that's a great question. So when I talk about, and I apologize for not explaining that more, when I talk about features, I'm talking about button clicks. So any item or element on your page that a user can click and interact with is what we call a feature inside of Pendo. So That's what we're capturing when we say features and we say, interaction with a feature. That's actually capturing the click event itself. So when they're clicking on that button, whether it be a menu bar button or a drop down or anything like that, it's capturing those exact click events. So yes, so whenever I say features or anything, just think it's synonymous to click events. Funnels are really similar to paths. Funnels are when you're dealing with a specific set of activities. So when they're going from, and this is a very narrow scope, but step 1 to step 2 to step 3. And where this can be helpful in, again, dealing with features is if you're trying to get users to a specific stickier feature inside of your application, and they can only take 1 or 2 avenues, you want to see if there's any sort of significant drop off. So if you're trying to get them to a specific area in the application, and there are 3 steps to get there, through Pendo and through funnels, you can actually declare those 3 steps inside the funnel and create a funnel that looks at each of those steps, and you can actually see where users are falling off most frequently inside that funnel. So if there are 3 steps to get to this key feature in your application, and you have a huge drop off between steps 2 and 3, that would lay some concern to me that maybe there's something either confusing about that area of the application, or just generally not engaging the user to get to that feature in the application. And I'd want to find out more. I'd want to kind of dig a little deeper, understand why there's this drop off. Maybe I want to create a path from that step 2 to see where other users are going instead of going to step 3 and clicking on a feature. So looking at that, it would really help in understanding just where they're going, where their movement is, and just better clarity into how we can improve that, whether it be through a guide or tooltip or some other method. So for a funnel, it depends on the circumstance. Usually we have a question regarding funnels, and can you create a split funnel, or would I have to create 2 different funnels? So it really depends on that. Usually funnels are very specific, so you wouldn't necessarily create a split with funnels. So you most likely use 2 different funnels. That said, it also might be a good opportunity to leverage paths if you're not as sure, or if there are multiple ways they could take, because the path will give you some clarity if they're going multiple ways. So if there are 3 different directions they can technically take after a step, if you do a path looking forward, it should show all of those options as next steps on there. So either doing 2 separate funnels or doing it as a path, either one should allow you to see if there's a variable kind of step in that process. Great question. One thing I want to note while we're in this section, we do have something coming out that I think is going to play really well into this. It's called Goals. We're actually releasing it very shortly here, and by shortly I mean hopefully within the next week or so. But what's going to allow you to do is start actually measuring activity. So if we talk about stickier features, we talk about ways of engaging them, and we're really going to actually in the next section look at that a little deeper. But it's also important, obviously, to measure what you're doing, measure the gains you're making in your product, the engagement levels you're increasing on these features in your product. And goals are going to allow you to do just that. You can see in this example here, you can have anything from ongoing goals, where you're constantly trying to increase at a certain percentage each week, or target goals, where you just say, hey, listen, over the next 7 days, we want to increase, we're getting 40 feature clicks right now. We want to get that to 120 feature clicks. And we're going to do a tooltip, and we're going to send out a marketing campaign, and we're going to do all of these different methods to try and increase engagement on this feature. We're going to have it on every conversation we have with clients and tell them about this great feature. And goals is a way to measure the wins, to be honest. I think it's tough, especially from a product standpoint, as fast as everything is always moving. It's tough to step back for a second and say, hey, listen, we're doing some great things here. We're accomplishing some great goals. This makes it a little easier. It's actually going to even be able to be thrown into the dashboard within Pendo, so you'll have that front page for you to look at and track as you're moving forward. But definitely something that's going to be interesting and certainly play into this as you continue to push out on specific features. So in the last section here, I want to touch on nature versus nurture, the great debate. Now, I'm sure they weren't talking about sticky features when they, when this is usually discussed, but I think it's a fair point. It actually came up when Brian and I were kind of talking about a webinar and kind of what to do and where we wanted to focus on. And it came to this question of, are features just naturally sticky? Is it product creates this feature, it's a great feature, everyone loves it, and it becomes sticky, or can you make a feature sticky? And I'd like to believe, I'm going to take the middle road here and say it's a bit of both. At least I think so. I think you can't necessarily make a really bad feature sticky. But that said, I think there are some really great features out there that aren't sticky, and it's because users aren't aware of them. I think through the education, through making them aware of not only that the feature exists, but also what it can do. Sometimes I see new features all the time, but if I don't know what it can do or what benefit it gives to me, there isn't necessarily a motivation to take some time out of my day to learn about it and figure out what it can do. It just, it has to be very clear to me immediately when I see that feature for the first time. So with that, I wanted to take a little bit to kind of jump into this and understand it from a couple of different levels. Looking at this, and the first one is always talking about delivering contextual help and improving the experience and also improving onboarding. I think there's a fair point to this in the fact that if a user doesn't understand your product initially, they're not going to necessarily find those stickier areas of the product. So it's important to, especially from an onboarding standpoint, start to get users familiar with it immediately. And to that point, that onboarding campaign really needs to focus on those features that are sticky. So let's say you've gone through the steps, you've done what Brian has gone through, you've identified some stickier features in your product. Those features need to be part of your onboarding discussion, your onboarding campaign for the user. Those are the places and areas you need to be hitting in your product immediately as the user comes in. And to that end, you also need to be including some calls to action in those tooltips to let them know what they're going to get out of it. I think that's the most important part, because you can see everything, and you can tooltips are popping up all over the place, whether it be for different forms, but I think the important part is you need to make users clear on what they're going to gain in using this feature in the application. Contextual help is another part to that, and just making sure that they are able to understand what this new feature is. If you don't understand what the feature is, you're not going to see the value. It's not going to become sticky. All those matter. You can have a great feature that does some great things that users could see a ton of value out of, but if they don't know how to use it, or it's too confusing, or they just don't totally get it, that's not going to be effective. If you ever look at our quick start checklist we have in Pendo, that was intentionally developed to focus on key areas of the product that we felt users need to be aware of to really start seeing value out of Pendo. You need to tag a feature, you need to tag a page to start seeing analytics, you need to look at visitor and account activity to start seeing value. So picking up those key points and being able to focus on them from an educational standpoint is absolutely imperative to ensuring that they're at least having the opportunity to learn about these sticky features, these great value driving features in your application. Talking about confusing areas, being able to publish tips and just help them through confusion. There's not always a product solution to every confusing part. Maybe there's a really great feature that just has a little bit of confusion that you can't get around, or you can't necessarily build around right now, which is fine. Roadmap is a precious commodity in these days, and sometimes if you can just add a little contextual help, you can get that feature around that confusing part to make it a very valuable area of the application. You can see at the bottom here, we even just had a little clarification around how we filter, how we have our time filters set up. And I don't know if there's necessarily anything confusing about the feature itself, but just needed a little help so that users could see the value and lessen the anxiety any users were having with the filter itself. So standardized feature releases and adoption programs, a huge part of it. If you release a very awesome, great feature that could be one of your sticky features in the application, but nobody knows about it, and you're not monitoring adoption, it's not going to necessarily give the value that users need. So being able to highlight that, through several different methods, I think goes a long way. We use a what's new. So our what's new area is actually, our what's new area is new, a couple months old, but it allows you to basically have a synopsis of your release notes on what users can see. So I'm not usually the person who sits there and reads through every release note that comes through. It's just not who I am. But I do like to know what I'm gaining out of it, what's in it for me. So being able to kind of just give a synopsis of what's out there, what's in the release, what's going on, really helps highlight and make sure those features that you're releasing are getting off on the right foot. And that's a big part of it. The value, the value of the product is in those releases and in those value adds you're constantly giving to the product, especially with some of the larger products in the, where you have a lot of different areas, a lot of different features. Sometimes those releases can really, those new features can get lost in everything that's going on. So it's even more important to ensure that you're highlighting that to users and you're making them aware that you're consistently adding value to the product. It's always tough from a success standpoint. I think, especially with larger products, you get around to a certain point, you get around to renewals, and it's kind of like what has your product done recently? Tell me what's going on. And it shouldn't be that way. You shouldn't have that conversation coming up to renewal. They should be aware of it every day as they're logging in. Every time there's a new release, it should be very clear and evident to them of the value you're consistently adding to the product, and also what they can gain out of that new feature. So what's new is a really interesting way to do that. I think there's a huge value in ensuring they're seeing the value associated with it and ensuring the product has a good step forward from a feature standpoint. Measuring the success of new features, huge part of this, obviously making sure it's doing what it needs to. I think a fair point here is in going back to nature versus nurture of sticky features. You might not get it right the first time. There might be issues along the way, or it might have some tweaks that need to be done. It's common. I mean, it's just the reality of it. You don't always get it right on the first time. It's sometimes that second or third time, but that's when you can really hone it in and make sure it's exactly what the user's looking for. You've invested a lot of time and a lot of resources in it, and sometimes it's something really, really simple that just needs to be tweaked and adjusted. But if you're not monitoring the success of those launches, you're not going to be aware of that. And 6, 7, 8 months down the road, if you then realize that it's not getting the implementation levels you expected or the adoption levels you expected, it's a lot tougher to kind of pull that out. But if it's just being released, you're 30 days out, you're not getting the adoption levels you expected, you can make the adjustments, make the tweaks, change it for the better, and get it back out there and released in the way it should be. So I think things like that have to happen quickly if they're going to be effective, and monitoring that and having something in place where you're able to monitor that, I think goes a long way. For continued adoption, I think this is another important thing. And I talked about segmentation before, but in this example here, we're actually segmenting, create a new funnel toward users that have never used the funnel before. So this isn't harassing users that might be using it on a daily basis or have already been familiar with it. But being able to target messaging based off of whether or not somebody has used a feature in the application, so that you can grab those users that have never utilized a sticky feature in the app, while also not overwhelming those users that are using the feature on a daily basis. You talk about guide fatigue and just overwhelming users. I think it's smart messaging is the name of the game, and making sure that you're providing messaging to users that applies to them is a really big part of that. You don't want to overwhelm them. You want to make sure the messaging is on point and applies to them so that they continue to engage through that. The final part of this, from a educational standpoint, is surveying. Now, there's a couple different levels of this. I think surveying users, again, going back to not always getting it right the first time. I think surveying can be really effective and immediately finding out what you can do to make it better, to make it a sticky feature. So being able to set up a quick poll on a new feature, target it toward users that have at least used it, let's say 3 or 4 times, and say, hey, listen, we noticed you used this feature a few times already. Love to get some feedback on what you like and what you don't like about it. It's easy, simple, doesn't require a lot of work, and it allows you to get some quick, dirty but honest feedback about a new feature in your application. I think that's always a tough thing. You don't always have time to set up user testing. You don't always have time to reach out to the CSM to set up a meeting with 2 different product lines that you think might be good for researching about this new feature. Sometimes you just need some quick, dirty feedback. about what's going on, about the feature you just released. So being able to kind of reach that right in the product is a big part of that. Also being able to look at the overall product satisfaction with NPS. So when we talk about, even going back to Brian's conversation about identifying sticky features, if you're using, and I don't know how familiar everyone is on the call about this, but our new NPS, I think we call it NPS Plus Analytics, basically starts looking at and tying together NPS responses with usage in the product. So when we look at, we have this page and feature usage inside our application about users, and then we have the NPS responses from users. And what we can do now is we can tie that together and say, hey, listen, we notice that promoters are more frequently using this page in the application, or they're clicking on this feature in the application. And to the converse, we've noticed these users who are detractors in your application more frequently use this feature in the application and spend time on this page in the application. So being able to tie that together, I would like to think that, if promoters are more frequently using this feature in the application and detractors aren't even touching this feature, then that's something we need to start driving every user toward. We talk about developing onboarding campaigns. I'm going to find those features in my application, and I'm going to drive every user that comes in to those features. The goal is to create a ton of promoters in your app. You ideally would like every user in your application to be a promoter, in terms of NPS. Reality is that's not always going to be the case, but if we can at least give a little bit of help in making sure that we're creating more of those by driving them to those features in the application, I think it goes a long way toward a successful experience with the user and also a successful product. Just getting more robust data from your customers. So gathering insight about the customer and just being able to kind of get going into the poll side of things. And we talk about stickier users, being able to analyze some of the data based off the responses. So in the left-hand side, you can actually see a role poll, and we have 5 roles set up there. If you don't have role information in your application, you don't have role information in Salesforce, but you desperately need it, this is a great way to get that information. You can start building segments based off of this poll. And going back to earlier when we talked about understanding what users are using your stickier features, if you don't have that information, this is how you can get it. It's a great way to just be able to gather a little more that information about the role, about the user, and then segment data based off of it to then understand your user base a little more and just understand their usage a little better. Finally, talking about effective beta programs for within the feature side of things, just being able to gather some quick feedback on this. We actually had a really cool example a couple weeks ago. We actually had I think we installed I think it was an Insights demo of a new kind of setup we wanted to do at Pendo. We actually implemented it through a guide, and allowed users to kind of see a new setup we were looking at for Pendo, and just to get their feedback really quickly on what it looked like and how it felt to them. Again, it wasn't anything official. It wasn't anything we weren't necessarily looking for scientific results. We just wanted to randomly sample some users, present them with what we were working on the product, and get some quick feedback from them to understand what they liked and what they didn't like about it, just to get a feel for if we were taking the right direction and what we could do. I think it goes to the fact that all feedback is good feedback, and you want to make sure you're taking advantage of anything users are willing to provide to help drive your product map, your product roadmap, and just your product direction in general. So with that, I kind of wanted to actually jump over to questions and just take a look at those. So let me just give me 1 second. So the first question we have is, can we link from the new features in the Guide Center to a walkthrough guide about the new feature? So yeah, with the what's new, so you can, I believe you can, we'll follow up with that. I believe from the what's new area, you can link into a guide, but I want to confirm with our technical team on that. So we can, who is that? Amelia, we'll follow up directly on that just to confirm
There is also a lot of best practices that Pendo encourages their customers to employ when you look at our guide center and how it's set up. So there's obviously a what's new section entirely that has the most recent feature announcements that you decide to put out there. That's a guide type in the same way that a light box, a tooltip, and banners are guide types. That's one other option you have, is to say this is a guide meant specifically for the Pendo Guide Center launcher, to say that there is a new feature. So there's some extra logic there for it to come up as the top most new feature and to have announcements for how many new features there are out there. There's another section you'll see in our Pendo Guide Center, which is something that you can have enabled called Guides Meant for Onboarding. So that's, I believe, just above the What's New section in our Pendo Guide Center. And what that is it's our 6 stickiest features. It's the features that we designated as, if folks understand how to adopt pages, features, publishing guides, creating paths and funnels, there's 6 of them in there. That they will be a lot happier customers, get a lot more value out of our product, be maybe more likely to renew, those types of things. So we actually designated a second separate section for these new features as a kind of a placeholder and a way for you to find those walkthroughs there. So What's New has a little bit different logic typically than a walkthrough, but we'll double check and jump in the app after the webinar to look and see if that's something that's capable of being done.
So on the, actually I'll start here. So segment targeting. So Nikki asked, if you're passing something sensitive like price into Pendo,
It's metadata.
yeah, so as a metadata field, can any user easily see that using Pendo validate install? So yeah, you would want to be careful on what you passed in through that, because in theory, if they were to put Pendo.validate install in, it would give them any metadata you're passing us. A list of all the metadata you're passing us. So what we normally say is just to be, and great question by the way, is just to be careful on what you pass, what you're passing. Obviously, you're passing about the user and about the account, but if it is any information that you wouldn't necessarily want that user to see about them, then you would want to just be aware of that and be cognizant of what you're passing over on that side of things. There are other ways, I will add, there are other ways you can pass data technically through. Obviously, we have a Salesforce integration set up that you can pass additional data directly from Salesforce into Pendo, so it does not go through the agent snippet. You can also pass directly via our API in through a custom field that you would need just to update. So that is an option. And third, if you did have a list of accounts based off tiers, you could also create a custom segment and upload that list of account IDs and create a segment based off of that. So there are a couple different ways to approach that. So if that is a concern, certainly encourage you to reach out to a CSM here at Pendo. We can definitely talk through several different alternatives to make sure we're taking the right approach. So Jill asked, can set up features funnels at any time and get useful data since everything is tagged and you're in the start. So everything is, so when you first go into the first time, you're going to tag all of your pages and features. You don't have to tag everything right away. And obviously Pendo is retroactive, so you can go in and tag it whenever. But for using funnels and paths, it's going to be based off of the pages and features you've tagged. If we have information from untagged pages and features, it'll let you know. It'll say untagged page area here, so users went into an untagged area. But you'd want to most likely to get, I always say, to get the most value out of paths and funnels, you definitely want to go in there and at least have your major features and pages tagged inside the application. Correct, Jill. So yeah, you want to go in and tag those pages and features early, just to have those available so you can use funnels and paths. But again, some reason, you can always, if there's anything you're missing or down the road you realize, I never tagged this page because I didn't care about it, you can always go back and tag that and you'll get the data retroactively against that. Chris asked, are you thinking about heat maps or recordings like full story? Is that something Pendo is wanting to get into? I think from a heat map standpoint right now, obviously we have the heat maps available in the designer. I don't know what the future is on that from a product standpoint. As the user recording area, I don't know anything specific about that. I know they've talked about integrations before, but I don't know if there was any specific products they discussed or anything to that end of things. I know it's definitely something that they have looked at, but I don't know anything more on that. If anything changes, if we find anything more out from product, I'll reach out to you directly, Chris, and let you know.
And one thing that's a differentiator between Pendo and Full Story in that regard is that Pendo is going to allow you to look at your everyone segment, every single visitor, no matter what plan level they're on, no matter how much time on site they spend, and all of the accounts that they're associated with. You can look at all those together. So the beautiful thing about segments is that you can create these metadata fields that are really disparate and different from account ID. And you can look at how folks are using your application based on their behavior, right? So page views, time on site on those specific pages, maybe feature clicks in a certain feature group. So what you're going to see by inspecting and creating segments for your visitors and accounts from a product usage standpoint is that you're going to have a lot of visitors that may cross over what your expected behavior is from different accounts. You may have a visitor from your Amazon customer, and you may have a visitor from your Walmart customer, you may have a visitor from Ace Hardware. And all of those visitors may be exhibiting the same behavior profiles and usage of your product that are totally different from what your expected usage for your high-level accounts versus your low-level accounts is. The point being there is that you're going to see a lot of aggregated data, and you're going to start recognizing behavior profiles and be able to correctively help influence the behavior in a positive direction. Whereas if you're looking at a single session recording and a single playback, it's really going to be only very specific to that one user and the actual session that they had, and that may not give you a good profile of all of your users or the users that exhibit the same kind of behaviors together. So it's just one thing to think about there. A lot of the things you can do in Pendo, the magic that happens is you're able to kind of create a segment of these are my power users, these are the folks that we have room for improvement on, and these are the folks that are out for renewal. Whereas if you're looking at one single session playback, it's only going to give you just the specific data for that one aspect. And passing funnels can be a great way to kind of help alleviate any of that pressure that you're seeing in maybe a troublesome area of your site.
So what about tracking on browsers or screen size? Great question. So we do track browser. If you go in through each of the visitors, you'll see it listed, the browser type as well as version. Nothing specific I can speak to on screen sizes. I don't know if that's something to necessarily capture. I know they do capture the type. So mobile, if you go in, there's a modal in Pendo's dashboards to see mobile versus desktop versus tablet. So they do have some vision in that if that's what you're looking for in that side of things, but I'm not sure on any specifics around screen sizes. We can certainly, I know it says anonymous on there. If you want to reach out, csm@pendo.io, I can certainly take a look for you as well and just confirm. But I do not believe we have anything on screen sizes specifically, just on device type, but browser is captured right in the visitor area. Any other questions at all? Great. No, I'll certainly pass that. Sorry, and that might not be in the. Is that an open? Oh, it is in the open. Okay. No, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. I'll certainly pass that along to product. I know there has been discussion around screen sizes in the past, and I don't remember the specifics on whether it was actually captured or not, but I will certainly pass that along. Got it. Okay. Very helpful. Appreciate that, Chris.
That's most of our presentation, folks. If anyone else has any other questions, we can take them offline. We really appreciate your time this afternoon. We hope that it provided a lot of value for you. If there's anything that you would like to kind of talk about with your CSM to say, hey, we need to kind of reevaluate this and get more insight into how specifically we can apply these, again, our CSM team would be happy to work with you on that. We will send out a link for the recording of the presentation, and we'll have our slide deck if you guys ask for that as well. And we have a note of all those folks asking for it here. Thanks again for your time this afternoon, and we look forward to working with you soon.